Okay, today's 3D body interface technology needs to go beyond art, engineering, and video games. I have some little early work of mine, how this came together over 20 years. Politics needs to get graphical. And I have three or maybe more budget picks done with money and ideology. Object-oriented design, which is a concept in computer programming. I show a little bit of the Xi faction battle I have going on. Tentacles, it's something that I use for absolutism versus relativism. Absolutism, picture a gigantic square with one half black and one half white. Relativism is like a checkerboard. There's mixtures of right and wrong, that kind of stuff. Well, I think if you add 3 dimensions to it, and you have tentacles that, with the half black and half white as the base, but has 8 sections to it, each of the 8 tentacles on either of the white and black side intermingle with each other to have the checkered white and black. I have here a virginity cone, picture like a pyramid with a tip, and then with another triangle touching its tip on the opposite of it. I didn't bother drawing this on paper so to visualize it or anything. About people that are dedicated to virginity, premarital virginity for genuine reasons, as opposed to people who flopped into it. In extremism, a circle versus a U versus a line. I want to show this in my spotter sheet format. I have right here some early work of mine that I've done about giving 3-dimensional look towards politics and doctrine. I'll say this is politics in a big mess. Squinch it down, give 3 categories. Isolate categories in the mess, solidify it, make it a little clearer, easy to see. That way this software and this ideological battle grid that I want to found, that we can take, I don't know how many pages the budget is, the annual budget of Congress is, and I'm sure it's zillions of pages, and start breaking it down more systematically so it's easier to navigate and go through and deal with. Object-oriented design, OOD, is something in programming where you have multifaceted variables, basically is what it is. Now you have a good old-fashioned x equals 3 that I have up here, just a good old-fashioned variable, numeric variable. But then you have what's called an object in a C++. They got changed to fields, I believe, in C#. I'll teach myself some C#. You have student as an object, but the facets to the object are different values. Student.gpa, student.age, student.gender, student.major. What happens is that the way the code is structured, it starts to resemble the situation reality more specifically and with more detail. There's more parallelisms. And whenever you get into that with ideology, you can define a certain course of action as a certain term. And then whenever you derive from that, you have a process of precedent established. So in the same way you diagram a sentence, when you lay out a sentence from a premise to conclusion, this 10 over 30 grid can make things easier to follow in debate. You can see it in all one glance. Something that'll look like this, certain objects and categorize, ways to categorize it, and courses of action. And this is something that I did with some colored pencils around 1997. You have a grid right here, and you have certain categories, you have certain objects, you have certain intersections and certain ways they interrelate to each other, in comparisons to each other. And also, like in one sentence, if you had the senator voted to raise taxes, you have the one word taxes, you have it defined, and you have different pieces of it elaborated on. Ambiguous needs. So it might say you need taxes, but how do you define how much or what for? And draw that between the differences between socialism and capitalism, and differences, how do you define socialism, how do you define capitalism. These are more of the negative definitions for both. Socialism, government dependency, fiscal dictatorship, overregulation, and capitalism, no help for the poor, corporate rule. So I define them both negatively. So just to show how you can lay something out, like it's a whole tree just from one word. And this is what I call the Xi faction, and this is epsilon. You have different factions, what I'll call the epsilon format, how they relate to each other and how can they be lined out and depicted. And for the Xi faction, same thing. Like a Xi Supreme, Xi Definitive, Xi 175X, Xi Recalled, Xi 2500, and Xi Dust. I'm getting to the point where the spider sheet, I'll have a line that will be more straight, but I'll have the peaks in it right here, establishment, peaks. You might have the people that are more in the middle, disassociated, alienated, and the people from the far left and far right, both alienated. They have that in common with each other. A different category. Then I have the bottom part where it can actually cave in on itself and bend. So what I have here for 8 circled, these 2 establishment peaks I have at the top, they can actually touch or have things in common with each other. They can argue in a context or another that they actually have something in common. So this is what I mean by extremism either being a straight line, a circle, or a U. And I have this other example that I call the beginning to the spider sheet. This might look like what I call a spider. Its legs and head and all that. Each color has a corresponding group that it might indicate how they're opposite of each other or how they parallel each other. And if you go down the X or Y axis, it depends where you go to compare all these points to each other. I imagine if you bend a piece of paper and you touch the tips of one side together, but you let the tips of the other side stay apart, it looks something like this. And I have here yellow, blue, lavender, and gray. So I call this a spider sheet. I used to call it bending the paper by itself the cookie sheet. Like wax paper, I'm thinking like, going to cookies, the cookie sheet. So to combine the spider format to this, I call it the spider sheet. And this is something that you can treat this as a blank page to start out with. And whenever you start saying if there's more concentration of power in one group or a concentration of importance you put in one group, you warp it or stretch it out in consistency to that. This is all the body interface that I have here. I have one example, use the Morpheus. I have like the Oculus Rift as well for the virtual reality and 3D environment. Then I have the body vests that give you a sensation like the core and AREG, I think it's called. They say it could be anything from mild as being in a video game where there's rainfall, like a lightning storm or something like that, for outdoor elements, for an outdoor effect. But I thought about having a sensation during an ideological debate where you just got refuted on one point that your consistency wasn't as much as you'd let forth in your doctrine. Your opponent caught you in inconsistency, and their rain is showering down on you. It's like a way to taunt them. So you have that tingling over your body that you gotta get rid of to make you work under pressure to refute them or to give a counterpoint to prove them wrong instead of you. The Dexmo gloves have that. It's done for force feedback. And whenever you grab an object during ideological debate, like the spheres and the triangles and the pyramids, like I cited earlier, that you're actually manipulating these objects in the air according to ideology and doctrine. If you want to declare that you want to put Buchanan in the place of Limbaugh and Alan Keyes in the place of Pat Robertson, it'll warp the triangle to maybe something like more curved or stretched, like a trapezoid or something. Well, you'll have to grab it with your hand and stretch it accordingly. So you could be literally altering your ideological shape in the air with these gloves with the force feedback. And the Hindo Hover, it has to be on a copper flooring, like a hoverboard. It floats in the air. Have something to where you're running and going in certain directions and everything, you still stay in place because you're traveling across the grid, but physically you're still staying in the same place. And I had this little gizmo right here. It's like to do the wall running in Titanfall. You run up to the side like this. For a split second, you could run against the wall with some rolling balls on or something like that. If you're dodging a point, or if you got refuted to a point where you have to do this stunt while you're trying to give a counterpoint. So you're combining an ideological response with a physical action. And just like I said, like with the Sith Lightning, you could build up credits every time you refute your opponent. A couple of times you can do it like a gamble. If you have like 10 credits, you can zap them with Sith Lightning. But they can counter you if they have more credits than you did, or times they refuted you and to use them there. So it's a little bit of to display cockiness, like part of a gamble or something like that. Bragging rights for a video game. And they have here the Virtualizer and the Virtuix Omni. Some people have criticized these because they say it's not as immersive as they're trying to make them sound. But I think if you integrate into the gameplay, like the hovering modules that the Prophets and Halo had, that if it make games with something around your waist in the game, so it feels more part of the game while you play it. So we can always work around technology to have something that's developed in a certain category and have it not be a waste. And right here in ideological debate, when you're using a little improv, you may have 85 doctrines in place, but you might only use 3 of them to build a new object on the fly. Because to show that you're someone who has a good ideology, but you might not be able to predict every counterpoint your opponent will give, you can build objects and fly like that. So with this device, with Leonardo, you can build them what it looks like in the air with this visor on. And it could be done, instead of just for art, it could be done for political doctrine, ideology, and debate, group counseling, self-exploration, heated arguments, and things like that. And you have Meta, the glasses, that you could just change things with your hand. This woman here is shaping a vase. It was down like a cylinder, but she did a curved dip in her hand and made it kind of cave in like a vase. So you could build objects that way. Now this man, John Underkoffler, okay, I'm right here. He cited that in a few stages of evolution, with this device, this 3D navigation device he had, that the gloves, right here, here's a glove, will disappear. It'll get to where it'll be gloveless like an Iron Man. But when I'm cited for this immersive body interface for debate and town hall meetings and personal psychological immersion, I advocate even more bulky stuff getting on you than before. You have the force feedback of the feedback vests. You have the force feedback with the hands. So you want the gloves bulky to be able to give you a lot of different physical sensations whenever you win a point in a debate or you lose a point in a debate. So this is one weird way I'm doing the exact opposite of what innovation would seem to do. And I've noticed that if you compare a mouse and a keyboard to virtual reality equipment, something you put over your head and your hands and your gloves and stuff, virtual reality equipment resembles battle gear. So these are the premises that I'm using with all my other sound files that I've made, that I want to raise some hell about these controversial issues and stuff. And I want to have this 3D body interface system at hypermedia centers that I called, where people go to have crisscrosses between town hall meetings and group therapy. So I want this to be awesome.